All right, I think we're ready to get started here. Please feel free to continue eating. Once again, welcome and thank you for joining us today for the 2022 State of the State Luncheon presented by First Financial Bank. My name is Jason Stubbe. I'm the city manager for the city of Humble and the incoming board chair for Partnership Lake Houston. Before we go much further, I do want to welcome Austin Bird to give the invocation as well as the pledges.
If you'll please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to the Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. You'll take your seats and bow with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for gathering us here today, Lord. We thank you for granting us the health and opportunity to do so. We ask that you'll bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies, and as we focus on the affairs of our state today, Lord, we ask that you'll just bless the community and state leaders, that you will give them the wisdom and discernment necessary to lead us in the right direction. We ask, Lord, that you will continue to protect our protectors, grant courage and the steadfastness to those that are first responders that lay their life on the line for us. We ask, Lord, that you will also just give patience and peace to our educators and parents, Lord, that we can continue to instruct and to nurture the next generation. And bless our businesses. Please allow us to be good stewards of your blessings. We don't know the trials and tribulations that may be in our future, but we do know that all is possible through you. It's in your name we pray, and with all sincerity we proclaim, God bless Texas. Amen.
Thank you, Austin. Want to go ahead and thank our sponsors. Obviously, events like today's lunch wouldn't be possible without them. Today's sponsor include our presenting sponsor, First Financial Bank, platinum sponsors, Shell Federal Credit Union, and the Mint National Bank. I think we've got all of the big banking industry covered here. Gold sponsor is the Auberge at Kingwood. The silver sponsor, Plain State Bank. And now to give a message from today's presenting sponsor, we're going to hear from Mary Carew from First Financial Bank. Mary, if you wouldn't mind coming up. Thank you, Mary. Also want to take a moment to recognize our dignitaries that are in the room. Obviously, Representative Dan Huberty, who we'll be hearing from later in the program. Shiva Baradurun from Texas State Senator Brandon Creighton's office. Dave Martin, Mayor Pro Tem with the City of Houston. Mayor Norman Funderburk, my boss, please clap. Bruce Davidson, City Council member, and Charles Cunningham, City Council member. Thank you, guys. I also want to recognize our new members in attendance. At the Catalyst investor level, we've got Modern Heart and Vascular Institute. If they're here, I'm going to give a wave, be recognized. Thank you. Business investor, Time to Eat Humble. If they're here, all right. Not literally, though, right? Just it's time to eat. Okay, got it. It's now my honor to welcome today's speaker, State Representative for District 127, Dan Huberty, and I'm going to just go off script. I'm sure it's beautiful, Blake. Thanks for spending time and writing it. But quite frankly, we all know Dan. His reputation speaks for itself. He has been a stalwart in this community for well over 15 years, starting out obviously in the school district with the school board, and then later in the state house. He's been president of the school board, chairman of committees. You've done a great job. We know that. But what I really want to say, rather than just read the litany, is to say thank you for your service to this community over these last 15 or so years, 10 in the legislature. The nice thing about Dan is whenever we had something going on in the city, whether it be a tornado, a hurricane, a freeze, I never had to call Dan. Dan always called or texted me, and before I knew it, I was then texting, Nim Kid if I had to. And I mean, he's that kind of guy to make things happen, and we all owe Dan a debt of gratitude. And beyond that, I want to say on a policy wonk kind of side, Dan, you did big things. You did grown-up things in an arena where that's not the norm. A lot of times it would have been much easier for you to just go in and lob bombs and send a few funny tweets out. But that's easy, and you didn't do that. You did consequential things throughout your entire career in the legislature, and we here in the community, we appreciate you very much, and thank you for that. So with that, with all the sappiness out of the way, I would like to go ahead and welcome the best-dressed man in the State House, Dan Huberty.
Thank you, Jason. That was very kind of you. I appreciate it. Obviously you can't do all this without the support of your family, and I'm blessed to have my wife Janet here with me today. It's been, along for the ride. My son Ryan, who's now growing up, and if you need to buy or sell real estate, he's your guy now. So, but it's kind of neat to be able to sit here and think about that. When I got involved in politics, it's almost 20 years now. Really, it's through a variety of different things, just like many of you do. You volunteer for different things and volunteered for bond committees and things of that nature. I met Dave Martin over 20 years ago when he first ran for school board, unsuccessfully because he couldn't beat the guy, and I went in and ended up beating the guy the next time. But you'll never live that down, Dave. But anyways, and I don't mean it flippantly at all. But anyways. But blessed to be able to have that. My new chief of staff, Amy, is here. Everybody's calling her the new Casey. Everybody knew Casey for all these years, but Amy is joined us from Austin today. But really, the reality is that my start in politics was really as a result of a conversation that I had with Dave Martin and Mike Sullivan many years ago, and talking about how we could be involved in the community and what we could do. Our kids were going to public school. I grew up in Ohio where it was different. You went to Catholic school. I don't say private. You went to Catholic school. It's different. Dave knows this from New Orleans. The schools, they were just different up north. And while they were theoretically private, there was not many public options. And you went to either a Catholic school, or if you were on the east side in Ohio, you went to a Jewish school. I mean, that was the reality of what it was. Even if you weren't Catholic, you were going to the Catholic school, which was, unique in itself if you weren't Catholic or Jewish, living in Ohio or Cleveland at that particular time. But coming down here, knowing that we wanted to be involved and go to the public school system, we got involved early in a variety of different things, and albeit then decided to run for the school board back in 2005. And so since that time, obviously, lots of things have changed. I was thinking about driving here. I was like super pissed because I was going to be late. And because I was stuck on 1960, right? And I was like, well, this is kind of my fault, because we really pushed hard over the last several years to get 1960 expanded, to get it funded, to get the project moved up. And I don't know, many of you probably don't remember, but Dave, you probably will, and there's a few other people. Mary, you might remember this, but this was a project that has been on the books for 20 years. I remember going to a event at the library in Atascocita years ago when Joe Crabb was the representative, and when I wasn't even a member of the school board at that particular time, and talking about it and the complexity of what was going to happen to expand 1960, and what you would have to do that, and the billions of dollars, and I say that with a B, billions of dollars is being spent on this expansion, because you had to buy the right-of-way, you had to buy people's properties. I mean, all the different things that were happening to be able to make this project complete. And so, that is, I'm glad that was a project that we were able to get moved up and get TxDOT on board with and get that complete. Completed, or to the point where I'll be gone by the time it's complete. Charles will be taking over for me, and hopefully the project will provide the opportunity for a better infrastructure and mobility within our region. in our area. And I say region for a reason, because if you think about it, if you go out and you look at our area, which I encompass, kind of the redneck Riviera is what I like to call it. But you think about Kingwood, Huffman, Crosby, Humble, this kind of area, this region, right? This is a region in and of itself. As the crow flies, you're probably 35 miles from downtown, but theoretically you're over an hour from downtown. When you're leaving from the 1960 Westlake Houston area to get downtown. So even though Houston came in and extorted and took Kingwood away, the reality is we're a regionally based area, right? Which goes into to the fact of how the region looks. And so we've had to become really self-sufficient in a lot of those areas. And so that was a huge project for us to be able to get funded, completed, and as it gets completed, sometime in 2024, it'll create that additional mobility that is necessary. In addition to that, you have the expansion of the Grand Parkway that's going to be coming around the back of Huffman and on down through Liberty, which is going to create a lot more infrastructure. Obviously, concerns then raise about the amount of traffic and trucks and things of that nature that are going to come on the roadway system as we go forward. But one of the things that came about when we were discussing this is that they were talking about on 2100. I don't know if you remember this discussion, but they were talking about tolling that particular road, and TxDOT got involved in that. Said we're not doing that. We're not coming out here and starting tolling roads and things of that nature. We're going to figure out a way to use the infrastructure funds and the money that we have in the state that we got as a result of that. So important issues. So what I thought I would do, this is be the last state of the state update that I'll give to y'all. And the great news about retiring from politics, and I'm serious retiring. I mean, somebody, I could imagine myself at some point, getting on an HOA or a mud board in the future, just so that I want to make sure the community that I live in is not screwed up. But I'm done, and that's I did not say I am not running for city council. I don't know who's going to run for city council, but it ain't me. So, no, thank you very much. I got other things I want to do. But the reality of the situation is that it gives you. Somebody said to me, says, Dan, do you feel like you have the freedom to be able to say what you want to say and do what you want to do? And I said, well, I always thought I did, and that usually got me in trouble, anyways. And Charles will learn this as we go forward. One rule of thumb is, Charles is, by the way, going to do a great job in the legislation. I'm very proud of him and his family for stepping up and taking on this responsibility. I really am, Charles. It's overwhelming. He'll walk into the office and go, what did I get into? Or, he tried to blame me one time. What did you get me into? And I was like, dude, I had nothing to do with your decision making. I told you all the bad stuff about it, along the way. But the reality is that they create ranking systems. And they do it for political reasons. They don't do it because, that's really how you vote. I mean, if you look at the substance of what came out of the Texas legislature last legislative session, and every session that I've been there, it's always repeated, and every election is the same way. We had the most conservative session that we've ever had. Okay, great. What does that mean? Don't know. But that's what they say. And in every election, people say, I'm going to make the country great again, or I'm going to fix everything and along the way. And you sit there and you say, well, why is it always broken? Why are we not as conservative, or why are we not as liberal, or where it's at? I've looked at my career that some parts I'm proud of, some parts I'm not so proud of. I've made mistakes. I'm a human being. And have learned and grown in my job and along the way, and I've made a lot of public mistakes, very public mistakes, and you've seen them. And like I tell people, it's like politicians are human beings just like you, and just like you. The difference is that with social media and everything else, everybody gets to be a keyboard warrior. I tend to be a little confrontational about that stuff. I will see people that will say things on social media about me and or people that I know. And typically I will confront them and say, I'm right here, say it to my face. And they won't, right? Because it's easy to be able to throw stones and things of that nature along the way. But when you think about how do you accomplish things in the state, I'm going to talk about some things that we accomplished over the last couple sessions that I think are important that we have to move forward. But you have to be able to work together, number one. You have to be willing to work with your colleagues on either side of the aisle, and you have to be respectful throughout that process. And I think, as Jason said, I don't sit there and tweet. In fact, I don't, very often will I say something or do something, because I don't think that's the media device to be able to communicate effectively what you want to try to accomplish. I believe in personal communication. I believe in having dialogue. I believe in picking up the telephone. My wife knows that very well. I mean, I hate the texting situation and all those other things. I do it because it's the way that we are being communicated to today. But I think the personal communication that you're able to develop with people, especially at the State House level, is so important. And the one piece of advice that I would give to anybody, including Charles, when you go in there, is make sure that you develop relationships with people, not only in the House but in the Senate, so that you're able to accomplish things. I'll never forget Governor Patrick came over one time, and this was when he was a senator, and he had been there already a session or two. And Dan and I knew each other for years. In fact, we knew his son Ryan. Janet did when we first got here and volunteered at the Harris County Republican Party. And so they knew each other, and we did events together and things of that nature. And, Dan was having a tough time getting some of his legislation passed. And, I reminded him, I said, Dan, I said, what you need to do is be nice to people that are over here on the other side, because you can't pass legislation just in one chamber. You got to pass it in both chambers, right? And get to know who the people are. And so that's the key of success in politics is developing those relationships. The politicians that want to be, on TV and social media and things of that nature, I would say to you, and they're probably some of the most popular ones that you will see. Okay. And you'll see them in the paper all the time, right? And you'll see them for a variety of different things. And as a result of the Uvalde shooting and doubling down on guns and all the other stuff that goes with it, which is fine. That's their position. They can do that. But look at their legislative accomplishments. Look at what they've accomplished. There are people that I'll put my legislative record up against any of them in the state, the U.S. Government, wherever it is, that are certainly more popular than me, and certainly could get elected to a lot of different things. But it's because they're using it for their own personal gain, their own political gain. And so as I leave, I think about that, and I've cautioned, and I sent letters to everybody that got elected, and I reminded them, I said, look, your job is to advocate for your district. And if all you're doing is getting out and being on social media and trying to be popular and raise money and raise funds, you're not advocating and doing the right thing for your district. There are members in the legislature that can't pass a single piece of legislation, that they have to have their cities and counties come to other members to get their legislation passed because they're incompetent or they're incapable of passing anything. And that's not the kind of legislator that you want, I believe, to represent you, or to be able to have, people that run your city government. The mayor is not flashy by any stretch of the imagination that's sitting right here. And you probably don't know what he can and what he can't do. But if you look at the success of what the city has done in gaining and recruiting the people, and the work that Jason has done very quietly, and building up the city and the tax base and all the things that you're supposed to do as a politician, and I don't view the mayor as a politician, or the city council for that matter, as political. You are, because you have to run for office. But the reality is that's the kind of model that we should have in our country today, and we don't. We don't. As we think about the state of the state, where we're at, last legislative session was a mess, right? For those of you that paid attention or saw what happened, our friends on the other side of the aisle, I'm a Republican, as you all know, on the other side of the aisle decided to leave town at the end of May. But what you don't know is that at the end of May, when we were finishing our legislative session, the night that they walked out during the regular session, there was a tremendous amount of legislation that was left to be debated. Very important pieces of legislation that did not get passed. And I'm going to give you one example of a piece of legislation that did not get passed that cost school districts and areas hundreds of millions of dollars, and that was the virtual education bill that was due to pass that night. And because it didn't pass, we were unable to pass that legislation until September, which means that school districts that wanted to provide a virtual education, remember, going into the start of 2021, meaning the school year of 2021, we were still struggling with COVID and how we were getting kids back in school. And you had a significant enrollment problem with school districts. And because of that, I remember some of my colleagues, some Democrat colleagues, coming and saying, Dan, what do we do about this now? I mean, this is horrible in our school districts. And I looked at most of them and I said, well, then you shouldn't have left at the end of May. And you shouldn't have left in June. And you shouldn't have left in July. And, you know, right, wrong, or indifferent, they felt they were doing the right thing. But the reality of the situation is it was over one piece of legislation that was an election bill that turned out, you know, being passed anyways, that if you look at this, the scope of what and you could disagree with it relative to a talking point, but if you actually read the legislation, what it required, you know, I mean, it's the securitizing and safety of our election process, which should be the most important thing. We're not voting for American Idol, folks. You know what I mean? We're voting for people to represent us, and we're voting to make sure that we protect the integrity of the system that we fought for so many years ago. You know, as I look over here, today is Flag Day, right? June 17, 1777, the Continental Congress passed that this flag here would become the national flag for a reason, right? And as we think about all those years, over 245 years ago, we think about that and we think about what the impact of that is that, you know, every decision we make is for our rights to be able to be a sovereign nation as we go forward. But the impact that we see associated with that caused so many dominoes to fall during that legislative session that were so significant. We got billions of dollars that came in into the system, infrastructure-wise, that we still have yet to spend. We still have yet to spend those dollars. We have to figure out how to be able to effectively spend those dollars. I can tell you this, though, that about $16 billion went into the school systems. It went directly to the schools, so that was what they called ESSER funds that came in. Those dollars are being now allocated and spent for a variety of different responses that school districts have. So that's a very important piece of the puzzle as we think about the state of education in the state of Texas. I'm very concerned, obviously, though, when we think about education, we think about all the things that are happening in education, and I've spent my career on that. I've spent over the last 20 years, whether I was a teacher, on the school board, or now serving on the education committee for the last 12 years, and I was chairman for 4 of those, the impact that we've seen from COVID. And how many of y'all have kids in school or grandkids that are in the school system? You've seen it firsthand, right? You've seen the impact. I mean, you got to be a teacher, right? And you got to see how hard that was and what the impact of that was. And the learning loss that we've seen and how far kids have fallen behind. It's very concerning relative to what we have. And so that is an emergency that we are continuing to struggle with and deal with. We have provided as much resources and funds that we can for that. We passed several pieces of legislation last session. House Bill 1525, which was a cleanup to House Bill 3 that we passed in 2019. House Bill 3 was the overhaul of the whole educational system, all the formulas, all the formula bases and everything else, including we had property tax relief that was included in that. That was over almost a $12 billion bill. If you add on the costs associated with the increase of the compression, it's over a $15 billion piece of legislation that we passed in 2019. In House Bill 1525, we added another $2.5 billion of additional support services to school districts on top of the $16 billion that we gave school districts that they're able to spend. So we have fully funded. So if there's people that are still saying fully fund schools, I believe we have. I believe we have. Now we have to give the resources to the school districts in the right way, and the school districts need to use those resources in the right way. We have an epidemic right now in teacher shortages in the state of Texas. It is huge. It is huge. And I'll give you an example. Typically speaking, teachers, about 95% of the teachers are showing up for school to teach on an average basis. Right now it's about 90%. And usually backstop that with substitute teachers. And so substitute teachers, you know, relative to being able to get them on calls, about 85%. This past year it was 65%. So what does that mean? That means that when the teacher's out, we typically would try to backfill it with a sub-teacher, and you can't because they won't show up. They won't show up. And so as a result of that, we have classes that don't have teachers. That is a problem. that we are struggling with, and it's because of the impact that's happening for a variety of different reasons, and we'll talk about the biggest one that's the elephant in the room here in a second. But we also passed what we call an accelerated learning bill that we passed last legislative session that required tutoring and support services for school districts that are out there. We need that to fully bake to be able to make sure that that works. But the end goal of that is to make sure that we can provide additional resources to school districts to remediate kids, to make sure that they have resources and they understand what they need to be learning along the way. As Dave and I have worked collaboratively, and Dave's been a dear friend for so many years, when he went to city council, we for years tried to figure out a way to get Lake Houston dredged, right? This is, pre-Dave Martin when Mike Sullivan was there, and pre-Dan Crenshaw when Ted Poe was there. But I remember going down to City Hall and talking to Anise Parker, who was the mayor at that particular time, when the drought was happening in 2011, and said, now is the time to be able to dredge out these canals. Now is the time to do this work. And she completely blew us off and said, nope, 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 you're wrong. Fast forward 2017, obviously what we had with the hurricane and the flooding and everything else. The work that Dave has done and the city has done and the Mayor Turner has done to help and support us has been amazing. I don't think y'all understand how much coordination it takes to get those gates open and all the things that we need to be able to do in infrastructure-wise. And so, Dave, thank you for being my partner and the state's partner in that, because of the work that you've done. We haven't had another catastrophe, since really 2017. Yeah, we had some small flooding as a result of, I believe, Alicia, but other than that, we haven't seen an impact in our community. We have a lot more work to do with the dams. We got some work that we got to do with the Corps of Engineers and with FEMA, and we're working with Crenshaw's office on all those things. But we have secured, at least from the state's perspective, on top of all the money, in the last two budget cycles, we got $30 million in 2019, $50 million in this last budget cycle. And we finally started, getting to the areas where we got the San Jacinto River dredge, we got the mouth bars taken care of, we still have more work to do there. But they finally moved into the areas called Roger Gully, which is in the Walden area, and now moving into the Fingers in Atascocita and getting all those areas dredged out. You can't imagine, I had no idea how much material was in those inlets, and it is just amazing to me to see how much material was in there. And some of you may remember when Jerry Eversole was when Jerry Eversole was president of the Humble Chamber of Commerce. And Mike Byers, I think, was just coming in, because I think Jerry was still CEO or president at that particular time in the late 80s. But there was a study done by Brown and Root at that particular time that said we needed to do a complete dredging of Lake Houston. It would be about $1 billion, and it got put on the shelf. Well, that's cheap compared to what we're talking about today. To be able to get that done. But the work that's being done right now is going to be important. There was a lot of things that we passed, APO legislation on best practices that were very important to be able to do, but there's some things that we didn't get done that need to continue to get done, and hopefully Charles will continue to take the mantle on that. Creating a dredging district is an example for the Lake Houston area. Very important that we need to be able to do that. We have to have an ongoing program to be able to maintain the integrity of this. And again, Jason, I'm fairly certain, if we go down just a little bit, the areas down there that were flooded in Humble, right? As a result of what happened to the San Jacinto River. It is not that far away, folks. When you think about all the areas that were flooded down here in the city of Humble and the impact that had. And making sure that we have other statutory requirements around the San Jacinto River Authority. They're under sunset review at this particular time, and hopefully we're going to have some very robust discussions about that. We continue to have the fights, as you may or may not know. Dave and I went up in it's now a year and a half ago to a very unfriendly audience up in Lake Conroe area to fight to make sure that we kept the lake levels low. And Dave did a great job in his presentation, but then at the end of the day also reminded them, yeah, we own 2/3 of the water, so we're going to do what we need to do anyways. But let's try to be able to create a compromise and create some mechanism to be able to do that, right? It's very important. We think about, as you go into the legislative session right now, so for the first time in 4 years, we are actually having interim committee hearings. Those interim committee hearings are where the real work gets done. It's where the real ideas come from and the real work gets done. And so we think about that. The last time we had interim hearings was in 2018. As a result of the pandemic, we had 0 hearings. We had no input along the process, which made the legislative session a little clunky as we went through it, because you're not able to get ideas and concepts of what you're supposed to be able to pass. And sometimes you're hearing things for the first time. But this time, we're able to have meaningful dialogue and meaningful discussions about a variety of different things that are happening out there. We had a new speaker this last legislative session, Dade Phelan, who did a great job navigating. Dade's been around the legislature for over 20 years as a staffer and then as a member. And so he did a great job leading and guiding us throughout this process. But as we proceed along, there's always some unfortunate catastrophe that happens, throughout the year, whether it's a hurricane or there's a shooting or, power outages or all these other things. I mean, those are all the kind of things that we dealt with. So we're still focused on the grid, very important. We did put a lot of money and infrastructure into that. But the reality of the situation is that the grid problems need to get solved by increased capacity and building additional plants, right? That's going to be the number one thing that we're going to have to focus on as we go forward. As more people continue to move to Texas, the demand on the grid is going to be significant. We in the last week or so, we have seen the amount of megawatts that are being used or utilized setting records every single day. That is a problem, especially if your grid goes down. And once again, you all don't really see the impact of that, right? Because you come in, you turn your lights on in your house, the air conditioning's working here, it seems fine. But I can assure you those plants are burning right now, and we have to make sure that we have the ability to have them shut down for maintenance, and we don't have the backup to be able to do that. So that is a significant concern. Infrastructure, very important to continue our infrastructure improvements along the way. Mobility is a critical component of that. You drive down into Houston, you drive into Austin, you drive into any major city, it's significant when you see the amount of mobility problems that we're having along the way. And as I mentioned, we do have the expansion out in our region in the work that Dave's done in the Kingwood area and North Park and on Kingwood Drive and 1960, our major feeders that we have getting in and out of our community along the way. Very, very important for us to continue that work and to be able to push on that. And as I think Charles knows this, is that one of the most important thing we can do is continue to raise our hand, poke our nose in transportation business, and make sure that we get the infrastructure that we need and the resources that we need out here in coordination with the mayor and the city of Humble and the city of Houston, and being good partners along the way. But 2 weeks ago, roughly 2 weeks ago, I was sitting in a public education committee hearing, and we were doing our interim charges, our first interim charge of the session. And Senator Creighton, who has now become the chairman of education, was having his first hearing for the interim for the session on dealing with public education as well. So Brandon was made chairman of education, which includes higher and pub ed, but he was dealing with public education. And that day, that morning, Commissioner Morath was slated to speak to both of us, and so because the Senate, thinks that they're better than us, we let him go over and talk to the Senate first, and we had our hearing and we moved our agenda around. And our agenda for that morning was to deal with mental health and the crisis that children are having within the Texas school system. We started at 10 o'clock. At about 11 o'clock is when we got notified of the first active shooting notification in Uvalde. Incidentally, we had professionals that came in and talked about it and talked about what is needed in our school system and the impact that had and the crisis that happened as a result of COVID and kids being impacted and the parents being impacted by COVID. What you don't see, or you probably saw it in your house, is the fights and the struggles and the yelling and the screaming and everything that happened with kids and getting them to do their work and showing up for school or showing up for Zooms or all the other things that happen and the mental anguish and everything that happened along the way. And so we had a lot of support and help and asked questions about, do you think we should, increase the amount of counselors in the school system? Yes, of course you should. Things of that nature. We're only funding at about 50% of what we need for counselors about 25% of what we need for social workers in our school systems. And what I mean by counselors are not counselors that tell you where classes you're supposed to take and things of that nature. I mean true counselors, professionals that can sit with students and get them to understand, if they have a problem, what the problem is. Once we got done with that, we started taking public testimony. And the public testimony was very unique, and you can go back and look at it somewhere around 11:15 to 11:45 when we first were notified very quietly that there was an active shooting and that maybe a child was shot. A child was shot, as we were notified. And the parents that were coming up, and again, this goes back to there is no middle ground. There is no, understanding of what one side thinks or what one side doesn't think. Parents basically pointing their fingers at us and telling us that you don't need any more laws. The teachers just need to teach. They don't need to be worried about my kid. My kid's fine. Stay out of our business. There is no mental health crisis. Okay. So at about noon that day, Commissioner Morath came in. He already knew how bad it was, and shared with us of the impact of what happened in Uvalde. He didn't share how many kids were shot at that point in time. Chairman Dutton stepped out. We kept talking, and Commissioner Morath presented his findings along the way. We tried to convince Harold to maybe take a break and let's sit and talk about it. And ultimately, our decision was to stop the hearing, send everybody home, pray, and go along our way, right? And then, of course, we heard about the repercussions of what happened along the way. And then, as obviously, it became, a political firestorm. You listen to CNN, they've got one view. You listen to Fox, they got a different view. There is no middle ground. Obviously, NRA was that weak, right? And you had our junior senator, Ted Cruz, calling out the governor, lieutenant governor, other people for not showing up. The former president calling out our governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker for not showing up to the NRA. I just shake my head. I shake my head and say, really? You don't understand why they didn't come? You don't understand the impact that those families have had? This is the fourth mass casualty event that we've had in Texas since I've been there, since I've been in office. And the reality is that, I look at this and say, we're culpable. I'm culpable, along the way. And we've got to do something. And people say, well, what do you want to do? And so I told Amy I was going to ask this question. How many of you all think in this room here that an 18-year-old should be able to buy an assault weapon? Please raise your hand. Okay, one person. All right. You can't buy a handgun until you're 21. I'm not talking about rifles and shotguns and things of that nature. But the reality of the situation is the majority of the people in the country think that. But unfortunately, Congress is not willing to act because they're afraid. Until people stand up and say it really is meaningful, that's where it's at. I expected actually more than that, but that's interesting. The interesting thing about this is that we, the people, have the ability to actually facilitate and help write the laws if we use our voice. But because we're allowing big lobby and the other people to control this narrative, we're never going to make that change. We're never going to be able to say to Dan Crenshaw, and we should be able to say to Dan, it's okay. We're with you. We're going to support you. These are the things that we'd like to see changed. Look, I'm not a supporter of red flag laws. Those are bad. They're bad for a lot of reasons. All somebody's got to do is make a complaint over you and they come get your guns. That's bad. I'm not suggesting that at all. But shouldn't we start thinking about how we should look at the system? And we talk about mental health. Look, I've been here. I was chairman of the committee that passed the school safety bill law. I know what's in that bill. I know what we should do, right? But the reality of the situation, it's gotten much more progressively worse. I don't know what the hell's going on in this country, right? Look at what happened this weekend. Over 45 people were shot in mass casualty events, right? 90% of those events were using AR-15 guns. Now, I'm not suggesting we're banning all those things. That's not what I'm saying. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that don't we have to start looking at this from a practical perspective, right? And we have to start with understanding what happened with these kids and these people during this crisis, this mental health crisis. Put the amount of resources and money into those programs to be able to help those kids and understand that. There were multiple failures at Uvalde, right? Nothing that we could have done legislatively would have prevented that. And I'm not even talking about the fact that the kid had just turned 18 and bought a gun. That was lawful. There was nothing there that you could have done about that. But here's a young man who had dropped out of school that nobody cared about. Nobody checked on him. Nobody looked at his social media posts. Nobody paid attention to it. Had there been something that the gun dealer could have done to see that, maybe it would have said, this is a problem. Maybe we need to talk to somebody about this, right? The second thing is we had a complete failure of the response team. We passed a law, we have training, we put millions of dollars into it, that the most important thing, there's a 3-component system here, is number one, protect the safety of life of the innocent. The protection of the law enforcement is down low, and I get that. I get that there were policemen who were scared, and they were afraid, and they didn't want to go in the door. Well, God damn it, if you're a police officer, that's your job, and if you don't want to go do that job, then go do something else. That's just the reality of the situation. We gave you that responsibility to protect those children. You chose not to. Then you had a complete failure of the hardening of the school. The door was broken. One propped open, it was broken. Right? So you have these failures along the way. It's a problem. So Speaker Phelan came out with a list, a component of cafeteria plan of ideas and concept that he came out with this week that we're going to go through. I'm just going to go through them real quick with you. Obviously, mental health, very important. What does that mean? Well, it means that we need to put more resources in the classroom for the counselors. Meaning that if a kid's dropping out of school, that it's still our responsibility to figure out what's going on with that kid and get them the help and the resources that we can. Okay? They're not throwaway kids. This kid could have probably been saved had somebody paid attention to him. Right? Expand our Texas child care health access through telemedicine. Impact pediatric crisis stabilization response teams. If you listen to the interview of the pediatric physician, the only one that was there, they had tremendous mental breakdowns afterwards and making sure we're taking care of our first responders afterwards. I don't know if that man will ever be able to go back into surgery again after what he's seen. Increase the number of multi-systematic therapies across the state. It's estimated at $575,000 per team per year. We need 140 teams to be deployed across the state. Expand coordinated specialty care teams across the state. That's at $475,000 per teams. We need another 100 teams spread out across the state. Increase the community mental health bed capacity. That's going to be about $30 million. And then school safety. Additional funding for advanced law enforcement rapid response teams. One of the things we're going to be talking at our next public hearing on the 26th of July, I'm proposing that we actually pay for security force and security services and police at all school districts across the state of Texas. That means that we're going to have to do additional training, recruitment, but the reality is that some school districts have police forces, some don't have police forces. But the reality is we don't give them the money to be able to pay for those police forces. But that's the world that we live in today, and we're going to have to pay for it. Additional training that needs to happen at the Texas School Safety Center. That's at Texas State University. Make sure that all school districts have the appropriate training to be able to do that. And provide school districts the funding for panic systems, tactical gear, response equipment. So we start thinking about that. All these things that I'm saying, it sounds like we're preparing for a war, doesn't it? Is that not scary? That's where we're at, and that's what we're dealing with? You know, I don't know about you all, but I sit here today as somebody that's voted for some of this stuff, right? And say, you know, it's my fault. It's many of my colleagues' fault that some of these things happened and that we're afraid. And I know it's easy to be able to say as I'm leaving that, but if you look at my record, I voted against a lot of stuff which has made me one of the most moderate members. And some of you have heard it or called it, that I'm a rhino or whatever the hell that is. That's fine. But you got to learn to govern along the way. And I don't envy Charles and the people that are going to go in and have to deal with this next legislative session because, I get it. The people that elect you are the Republican primary voters that come out. Some of you probably didn't vote in the primaries. Some of you did. But the reality is that's who determines who's going to be your representatives. But what gives me some hope is some of the surveys and things that I've seen. Janet sent me something the other day about, should an 18-year-old be able to buy an assault weapon? We can talk about shotguns or rifles or things of that nature, just that. And I think it was 75% said no. But does that translate? Does that go down? I don't know. I saw now that Senator Cornyn is being criticized. There's a group that's out there. These guys are the biggest piece of crap that exists called Texas Empower Texans or Texas Fiscal Responsibilities. Charles will get graded on them, I'm sure, this year. And I'd say it to their face, and I have said it to their face. But the reality is now they're calling, Cornyn a traitor. Because Senator Cornyn, who is a, remarkable man, who has the courage to say, I'm number 2, I'm the senior leader, I've been around a long time, if not me, who is going to try to fix this, situation, from a congressional delegation perspective. There are members that voted their conscience as Republican congressional people are being called traitors to the Constitution. The reality is that, we as a society have to make a decision. Do we want to fix what's wrong or not? Or are we just okay putting our heads down? Are we okay with that? And, many of us, spend, hours on social media a week, a day in some regard, in looking at what's happening out there. And what I would say is that let's try to figure out how to do something about it. Let's figure out, as we go forward and starting small, and starting and making the right decisions along the way. I think that's what's going to guide us and drive us. I'm confident in Governor Abbott. I'm confident in the Speaker and Lieutenant Governor Patrick and their leadership as we go forward. They don't want this to happen. The governor's pissed. I was with the man, when we went through, the Santa Fe shooting, Southern Springs shooting. I was there. I was in his office. He was asking me what we thought we should do, which is the result of the work that Chairman Bonin put together with Senator Taylor, when we passed the school safety measures in 2019, which at that time, even the gun sense group said, yes, this is a great step in the right direction. These are the right things to be able to do to try to fix some of these things. You're not going to fix them all. Look, you can't stop evil. We get that, right? If evil wants to, proceed upon our lives, there's not much that we can do about that. But we can try to at least stop some of it. Make it harder. Make it more difficult, right? Those are the things that we ought to be doing. And I hope and I pray that as new leaders come in, and I don't know, Charles, you can have 30 new freshman Republican members, that they're not afraid to make a decision, that they're able to communicate and talk to their community. We've been fortunate that we haven't, we've had shootings at our campuses in Atascocita. You may or may not be aware of some of those. Now, they weren't, one was drug-related, both were drug-related, actually, but both happened on campus. One young man actually got killed on Atascocita's football field a couple years ago. The reality is that it's here. It exists. It exists within our community. Can we provide the resources to be able to protect our children? God forbid that we have an event like that happens within our community. Or God forbid it happens to somebody in this room with a child in those campuses. That is the biggest fear that I have. My last one just graduated from high school. I was always worried at some point that there was going to be an incident within the high schools, right, that could happen. And what do you do about it? As a parent, you're just, you can't do anything. I don't know if some of you have seen some of the videos from the parents trying to get in and, go into the school and save their children along the way. We will thought we learned our lessons from Santa Fe, right? We didn't. And so, we have a lot of work to do. And my hope is that as we go forward, through this interim session, is that we are able to work and craft legislation that will be meaningful, that can make a real difference in people's lives as we go forward. There's a lot of work to do. Things always change and things are always different, and I'm sorry to be a bummer on that whole deal right there for a little bit, but I really believe that, the state of Texas can take a position and show leadership if they want to, if the members of the legislature want to be able to do that. And we've led on so many different things over the years, right? We really have. From education policy to infrastructure improvements, all the things. People want to live in Texas. People want to come to Texas. #1 job creator for the last 15 years in a row, right? People are coming to Texas because of our economic policies and because of the decisions they make. Want to live in our communities, right? They want to bank with us, right? They want to be able to do all the things that people want and have their freedoms, and we allow all those things to happen. But we have a crisis on our hands that we've got to get a hold of, and we've got to deal with that in the right ways. And so as we go into the next several months, my hope is that these commissions and these committees that have been formed by the governor and lieutenant governor and the speaker will create the opportunity to continue having those meaningful discussions. And listen, we want to have both sides of the argument, right? Don't we? We should. We should be able to have input from each side of it. The people that are completely opposed to guns, the people that are completely for guns, and be able to come and get in the same room and be able to have those conversations. So I'm hopeful that the work that Senator Corner and his committee is doing will be able to be a step in the right direction. I know it will be a step in the right direction. We as a responsible grouping of individuals that are here, that attend Chamber of Commerce meetings, who are thoughtful about that, need to show our support for men like that, right? We need to say thank you, and show our support to Senator Cornyn. So if you feel like you want to shoot him an email and say thank you, because I assure you, he's got a lot of not thank yous in his inbox right now. He's got a lot of other people that are pushing that. But it would be interesting, and I told Amy this earlier, it's like I was expecting a little different result, but had you gone down to Uvalde, Texas, had the same conversations about guns and debates and things like that, what do you think the response would have been a month ago or 2 months ago, as it is today, right? And the impact of that and what you're seeing happen. And we're not trying to do anything other than just be able to make sure we have honest, thoughtful debate, and try to come up with meaningful solutions. People are tired of politicians saying, it's mental health and we got to work on this, but we got to come up with meaningful solutions along the way, right? So that's what I'd like to see us do. I'm happy to take any questions if you have them. Otherwise, I'm happy to shut up at the same time. And I just would like to say this one last thing, and I'm happy to take questions, is that I want to thank y'all for giving me the chance to represent you for so many years in this community, and for your support. If I made you mad, I'm sorry. If I helped you, I'm glad. But my goal has always been to do the best job I can for our community and to make this a better place to live for you, me, my family, and all our kids, because I truly believe this is one of the best places to live in the state of Texas. So happy to answer any questions if you got them. Yeah, thank you, brother. No? All right, thank y'all.
Before we conclude, I do want to welcome up here Interim CEO Kyle Sheldon. I believe we've got a little bit of a presentation, so you're not just done just yet. I know we're running tight on time here, so I'm gonna breeze through these real quick. We have several events coming up. We've got networking after hours, hosted by DNA Studios and Minutemen Press. That's going to be this Thursday, June 16th. Partnership Lake Houston is also bringing back the Young Professionals program, which is open to everyone 40 years and younger. The program kickoff event will be on June 22nd from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. at Main Event in Humble. And the Leadership Awards Luncheon will be July 19th, where we will honor the 2022 Top 4 Under 40 and be joined by Shane Benson, Senior Vice President for Field Operations Regions for Chick-fil-A. If you are interested in attending any of those events, please visit lakehouston.org. And then finally, we need to thank our outstanding sponsors one more time. Our presenting sponsor today, of course, First Financial Bank. Platinum sponsor, Shell Federal Credit Union. The Mint National Bank. Our gold sponsor, the Auberge at Kingwood. And our silver sponsor, Plain State Bank. That concludes our program for today. Thanks for coming out. We'll see you next month. Have a good rest of the day.